Join me in a thought experiment. You're a seasoned documentary filmmaker, and Netflix has optioned your latest project, a story of climate disasters targeted at a US streaming audience. Your team is debating two approaches for the opening shot. Do you play on viewers' ideas of wilderness by panning over a remote landscape, the Greenland ice sheet, a stretch of still forested Amazonian jungle? Or do you immerse them in environmental degradation with a montage of hurricanes and wildfires, smokestacks and open pit mines? Either way, you know that the studio expects the film to nod to climate science while building its standard 3 acts around well-worn myths of apocalypse and redemption. An environmentally minded A-list actor will anchor the film's globe-trotting journey, the Maldives, Madagascar, Brazil, Africa, and make your story feel like their own. For a fleeting moment, you may ask yourself, over the past 20 years, have films like the one I'm about to make really changed anything with respect to climate change? But the ink on the contract is dry, and time on Netflix's production calendar is ticking. Blue Lab began with a simple question. What if we incubated, then figured out how to scale a model of climate and environment storytelling that challenged the orthodoxy of big-budget streamers? For 2 decades, Netflix and others have invested in climate documentaries that are sweeping in the data they amass, the disasters they record, the emotions they elicit. Today, such stories are increasingly produced not by independent filmmakers, but by the streamers themselves, using narrative formulas whose public impact arguably has waned. 4 years ago, Barron, Bixler, and I launched Blue Lab to disrupt the media monoculture by seeding stories about climate change and other challenges that begin and end with questions rather than lay out facts or positions, and that dwell in the local. Our method is to make room for skepticism alongside facts, hope alongside despair, and lore alongside data. Our core tenet is that the specific is universal. We see our innovation as twofold. First, Blue Lab is a training ground where researchers become storytellers who follow environmental problems and possibilities beyond the university, to places where they are being worked out on the ground, and who craft their stories in response to lived realities rather than media formulas. To date, our members have created 5 original podcasts, 5 original projects, 3 podcasts, a series of dispatches about uncanny coastal places, and a documentary film titled California on the Edge that is currently in production. In this work, Blue Lab is mobilizing environmental research in the service of telling stories that reach audiences across some critical cultural divides. We do this by equipping our storytellers with the mentorship and tools to amplify the reach of their vital work beyond papers, journals, conferences, and classrooms. Second, Blue Lab is pressure testing the question that inspired our launch by making climate documentaries and other forms of environmental storytelling and art that foreground people rather than data, and that resist both apocalypse and the easy fix of individual behavior change. Ultimately, we think such stories help to close the gap between research that addresses urgent problems and the experiences of communities grappling with climate change among other upheavals. Communities, as our storytelling explores, are also rolling up their sleeves and doing the slow work of protecting, repairing, or salvaging the places they call home. Thank you. Oh, right, not yet. That's fine. I'm happy to invite my co-founder of Blue Lab, Barron Bixler, aforementioned in the pitch, up for the Q&A.
Thank you so much. Could you talk a little bit about some of the communities that you all are engaging with and the challenges that you're documenting with them?
Yeah, to date, our projects have ranged in terms of their locations from the central Philippines, where Super Typhoon Haiyan made landfall over 11 years ago, to sites up and down the coast of California, to right here in New Jersey along the shore, to Norway, to a small town and First Nation reserve in British Columbia. In each of these cases, the group or individual helming the project has either a first-order connection to that place, or spends months cultivating relationships with really diverse members of those communities. And what we're finding across these really different settings, in starting from a position of doing climate storytelling in a different way, is that actually there are lots of other equally, if not more, pressing challenges. And we also are really interested in where climate change is a central crisis or upheaval, but that's not the framing that is meaningful to the community. So that's one of the points that I think has really tied together our work and our sort of incubation of this new model. Would you want to add to that in any way?
No.
Okay.
I know when to fold them.
Okay.
I'll get very close here. Can you tell me a little bit about how you're planning to scale in terms of finding the right budgets? I mean, you're talking about going against incumbents like Netflix. So how are you planning on finding that budget and continuing to scale, especially internationally? I'm guessing you're looking at projects outside of.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is once Netflix was a small, scrappy startup that was going up against Blockbuster video store. But no, in all seriousness, I think we're also interested in a model that actually, we are the only such media production studio housed in a major research university. We are in the Environmental Institute here at Princeton. And so I think we are thinking about scale in two ways. One, and maybe the most important for us, is our ability to seed a whole new generation of storytellers, right, as a new model of environmental education, in which we're bridging sort of the gap between media creation, environmental journalism, environmental documentary, and so on, and scholarship. And in doing that, our impact is measured by how our projects land and reach audiences in the places where the projects are set. That's our first sort of measure of impact. And so it's been really meaningful that the project set in the Philippines has had 50% of the listeners be from that region, right? In addition to other parts of the world. I think that we have some other ideas of impact that might actually be about defining ourselves as not necessarily competing with the streamers, but in fact thinking about how we move a different model of action than has been typical for environmental storytelling. Do you want to maybe speak to that?
Yeah, exactly. One example that has really been on our minds is a lot of my documentary work for the last 25 years and our work together has really focused on the labor of repair and finding meaning in work. And so I think the sort of objective of a lot of environmental media and storytelling seems to be to galvanize kind of political support or policy advocacy or to kind of change consumer behavior. And we have been thinking a lot about, and some of the people in our documentary film about California have talked about having a climate core. But we think like we're finding inspiration as filmmakers and documentarians in the work of people who, despite all forces that are working against them, and despite their own despair and fear for the future, are simply rolling up their sleeves and doing the hard work. And we think that one impact of this kind of work would be to actually highlight that work that's happening behind the scenes by scientists, researchers, non-scientists, environmental justice advocates, we think by shining a light on this work that it actually could potentially have an impact to show people, if they're looking for meaning and direction in their lives, especially young people, that this is a kind of work that is worthwhile despite the challenges.
One more question. You've already started to answer this a little bit. I was going to ask you, because you were talking about the sort of community engagement aspect of this, the importance of mentorship within this model and sort of what that looks like.
Yeah, and it is like a kind of 360-degree model. So when we started this work together, I, as an environmental humanities researcher, Barron, as a longtime documentary photographer, writer, designer, and now filmmaker, we realized we needed mentorship and we needed to bring in consultants. And so we've had audio journalism teams from NPR's most popular podcast Throughline to a small independent audio documentary team out of Philly work with us. We have a consulting producer who works with us on our documentary film work, who is a seasoned PBS SoCal producer of all of their environmental programming for 15 years. We get mentorship and consulting from them. They help do trainings of our students, our postdocs, and other collaborators. And then it is a very sort of grassroots model, if you will, where we have postdoc-led projects that have brought in to date in just 3 years 15 undergraduates across this campus, right, who work on teams, who go out into the field with our project leads. We're starting to also try to think about scaling that beyond Princeton in a couple of ways, through a new partnership with a small college in Maine, and through a summer course that we'll be piloting at Impala Research Center in central Kenya. And so we're trying to think about how philanthropic support and other forms of funding help us actually grow this, right, beyond the campus.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.